Member for Surrey Newton.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It is a pleasure, and I'm happy to stand again to speak on Bill 10, Budget Measures Implementation Act 2016. Madam Speaker, there are a number of interesting items in here, Madam Speaker. And I'm going to talk about one thing first. The first thing. And Madam Speaker, I want to talk about the Prosperity Fund, our favorite topic for this debate. Some call it fantasy fund. Madam Speaker, fantasy fund, or you can name it anything you want, because at the end of the day, you won't find anything in there. And you've heard debates here. They say that they're setting aside $100 million, 50% is going over there, 25% is going over there, another 25% may go somewhere else. So where is this money? Madam Speaker, I think if you really look at it, what's behind all of this is what the Premier said before the last election. She said, we will have LNG plants all over the province. 15 of them, 3 of them will be in operation by 2015, Madam Speaker, and 2015 came and gone. 2016 came and almost gone. It's going to go, and no LNG. And that Prosperity Fund was attached to the LNG, the revenue that will be coming from the LNG, Madam Speaker. That's what was promised, along with 100,000 jobs, debt-free BC, no sales tax, Madam Speaker. Everyone will be floating with money. That's what was promised. That snake oil never came. That's exactly what was promised. Now, everyone is asking the Premier, what about that promise? So your record, because she knew this government's record, since I've been following them, 2001, 2005, 2009, 2013, and this last election. They, Madam Speaker, promised something different before the election, then they did quite the opposite. And their record is impeccable on that, impeccable. They will say anything to win the election, then after that, they'll do quite the opposite. And they knew. They didn't mean that to be serious about that. All they care was about winning the election, Madam Speaker. Let's go back to 2001 election. They weren't going to sell the BC Rail. Remember that? And they were not going to rip up the collective agreements. Remember that promise? In writing. They will not do that. But right after the election, what did they do? Through thousands of those low-paying, mostly immigrant workers from healthcare on the streets, Madam Speaker. Some of them never found jobs after. Some cases, the entire family was thrown out on the street. It was after they made the promise they'd never do that. They said they will never sell BC Rail. They did that. Madam Speaker, 2005, what kind of promises they made at that time? And then 2009, we will not bring GST. Remember that? Never bring GST. But right after the election, that's exactly what they did, Madam Speaker. And then the next one, well, our deficit will not be over $485 million. Remember that? Not a penny more, $485 million. What we found after the election was it was almost $2 billion deficit. So that's what they said. What they said before the election, what they do after the election is exactly the opposite. And here's again. In order to cover the stuff that they promised and they weren't even to deliver, so now they came up with and created this fantasy fund, $100 million. Well, it didn't come from the LNG. Where did it come from? It came from the hard-working, tax-paying British Columbians. They dug deeper and went deeper into their pockets and dragged $100 million MSP premium increase and set aside this $100 million prosperity fund. That's what it is, Madam Speaker. So make no mistake about this. They can talk about saving account, they can talk about prosperity for the future, they can talk about anything they want. The fact is they took money out of the hardworking, tax-paying British Columbians and they just created this phony account so that they could dip into that account and pay something else. That's what they did. So, Madam Speaker, that's what we have seen, what we have in front of us, Madam Speaker. And you know what? When they were making that promise before the last election about LNG, how much money is going to come in, they knew. They knew that the United States was way ahead of us. They knew Qatar was way ahead of us. They knew Australia was miles ahead of us. They knew the United States, Madam Speaker, they knew, they ought to have known, United States is sitting on the largest deposit of gas in the world. They knew that. Madam Speaker, they knew that, and they knew that within 10 years, United States will become self-sufficient on energy. They knew that. So what would happen when the largest importer of energy is self-sufficient and then they start to export? What would happen to those prices? They knew that, Madam Speaker, but they sold that snake oil. Madam Speaker, I'm getting the nod, and noting that hour, I will reserve my time to speak again, but I adjourn the speech.